Today I will be making a presidential tier list. And I understand I am just a teenager and you're like, Whitman, nobody's going to watch this video. You are 13 years old and rating the presidents. And I'm perfectly okay with that. So if you are watching this video, make sure to like and subscribe and hopefully comment as well. But let's start this off with a fairly easy decision in itself. George Washington is an S tier president. I don't think there's any argument about that. Everybody pretty much knows George Washington was either best or second best president, and I'll get to that in a second. He was literally the reason our country is here and the reason it got off the ground. So yeah, S tier easy. Next up, we got John Adams, who was not a good president. XYZ affair. The reason we kind of brought him into office was just kind of progress the country a little bit, stop French and British people from stealing our sailors, and he did an awful job of that. I will not put him in F because there are a lot of presidents worse than him, but he does go in D tier. Thomas Jefferson was a good president. He is not S tier, but he is definitely A tier. Expanded the country, and it was a good move. Despite going against his morals, I do think it was better for the country, and it was not a bad move to go against his morals as long as it was benefiting the country, and it did that. And what I am referencing, of course, is the Louisiana Purchase, which makes up more than half of our country. So, yeah, that was a very smart decision, and the only major thing that happened during his presidency. James Madison was the president during the War of 1812, and honestly, he was a good leader, but he's not as good as everybody says he is. So I'm going to put him in B tier because while he did get us through that, it did not go as well as we would have hoped. James Monroe, yeah, he's just a very mid president, to be honest. He kind of went in there, and he was the president during the quote-unquote era of good feelings because we had just won the war again against Britain. So, yeah, I mean, he didn't have to do much. He didn't need to do much. I think he could have done more. He definitely could have done more. But he was just kind of set up to be president, not do anything. So, yeah, I think a very average presidency there. JQA, or John Quincy Adams, was not a good president. He was the start of sectionalism, which eventually would lead to the Civil War. It was kind of the tension between the South, North, and at the time, West. Yeah, he was not a good president. He was not a good person. He randomly insulted other candidates, especially Andrew Jackson. Kind of cheated to get into office anyway. Not a good guy, not a good president. D tier. Andrew Jackson, easy F tier. I mean, one of the worst presidents of all time. I would not say the worst, but definitely up there. I mean, so many different things that he did that I did not agree with, did not like, do not like, to be honest. The Indian Act, the Indian Removal Act, where the Supreme Court basically said that the Cherokee did not have to leave Georgia, and he just went ahead and did it anyway, proving that he thought he was a king, Jacksonian democracy, which basically made him a monarch. He was an awful, awful president, and I could probably go on a lot longer. Next up, we have Martin Van Buren, and he was basically the predecessor of Andrew Jackson, the next step in line for Jacksonian democracy. And while he was slightly better than Jackson, that's not saying much. So, D tier. Next up, we have William Henry Harrison, and this one is going to have to go in C tier. Not because he was an average president or anything, it's just we didn't really get to see much because he died about 2 months into office. So, yeah, C tier. Next up, we have John Tyler, and I really argued whether I was going to put him in C or D tier. I think I'm going to have to stick to C tier because the reason he didn't do much when he was in office. I mean, he only served about 3 years because he got put on right after Henry Harrison died because he was the vice president. And he didn't do much while he was in office, not much to be done. But he was very pro-segregation on the Confederate board in 1861. So, yeah, not a huge guy of his morals, but I'm going to put him C tier for presidents. Next up, we have James K. Polk, and he is famous for, while in office, for the additions of Texas, New Mexico, Utah, parts of Wyoming. So he was a big, like, besides Thomas Jefferson, he was the biggest adder of land to our country. So I'm going to give him B tier. He didn't do many bad things, and I do think expansion was a good thing at the time, besides the fact that we were probably kicking a lot of natives out of their land, except not with the New Mexico, Texas, and Utah added additions, because that was Mexico's land that we won fair and square in a war, although there were a couple contradictory things that went along with that. Nonetheless, I do think that this was a good thing for the country. Zachary Taylor is up next, and he is also going in C tier. He only served 1 year before his death, so that was unfortunate. I mean, he came in and he had very vague political beliefs. He's only supposed to have been elected because he was a national war hero in the Mexican-American War. So, despite having vague political beliefs, he got elected, and the one thing he was clear on, he wanted to keep the Union like sacred. That was his one goal, and he did do a good job of that in the 1 year he was president. Still going C tier, because really there was no reason for him to be the president in the first place. Just a lot of, pride for him being in the war. Millard Fillmore was an interesting president. He took over when Zachary Taylor died. He did some good things, some bad things. He delayed the Civil War by about a decade and a half by passing the Compromise of 1850, which basically said that California would join the Union up north to keep the Missouri Compromise sacred, keep the line in balance. And although he did really, really support the Fugitive Slave Act, which was a very pro-slavery move, I'm going to put him in C, because that kind of balances each other out. If he hadn't been a huge supporter of the fugitive... Actually, no, I'm going to put him in B, because I think delaying the Civil War by 15 years is an accomplishment that we cannot ignore. B tier for Millard Fillmore. Time for the 14th president, Franklin Pierce, and he was not a good president. Going D tier here. Basically, whatever Millard Fillmore did to set back the Civil War, Franklin Pierce basically just erased all that, made it come quicker. He did nothing to stop the uprisings in Kansas and Nebraska, did nothing to stop John Brown, who murdered multiple people just because of their beliefs. I mean, things were going wrong left and right. The only reason he's not F tier is because people like Andrew Jackson were just even worse. Next up is James Buchanan, and I'm going to have to put him in D tier, because he's not F like a lot of people would say. A lot of people will blame him for the start of the Civil War, even though that was more Franklin Pierce's fault, to be honest. He did not do much in his time of presidency, but the Civil War did start by the end of his presidency, and he could do nothing to delay it. So I'm putting him in a low D tier. Here we have the 16th president of the United States, a very popular one, Abraham Lincoln. And a lot of people would rate him S tier. I'm going to rate him A tier. He was a great president, do not get me wrong. He was not as good as George Washington, as a lot of people would like to consider him to be. A lot of people will credit him with ending slavery, which I guess he technically did do that, but that's not as great of a thing as people hype it up to be. Because think about this. Think about it this way. They went from being unpaid hard laborers that were treated like dirt to being unemployed people that were treated like dirt. Like, who was going to hire them? Nobody, unless it was hard labor that paid absolutely nothing. And they were still treated like dirt. So, yes, he got them out of slavery. Whoop-de-doo. Like, it didn't do much for them. It's not like they got rights or anything. They just didn't have to be bossed around by one person. They were bossed around by everybody. Good for them. Next up, we have Andrew Johnson, and he is absolutely going in F tier. I don't know what it is with the people with the initials AJ, but they were just awful presidents. Andrew Johnson got impeached in 1868 after the death of Lincoln. Like, he only lasted a couple of years before he got impeached. He did not do anything productive in his time in office. He was just an awful president, and he definitely deserves F tier. Next up, we have the 18th president, Ulysses S. Grant, who is going in A tier. He was a great man and a good president. Like Lincoln, he very much fought for slaves to be freed, and unlike Lincoln, actually better than Lincoln, he was not really pro-segregation. Like, he tried very hard to make sure slaves could get work after they were freed. He was a good president, and he was a Civil War hero, so I rate him A tier. Next up is Rutherford B. Hayes, and he is going in F tier. Awful president. He came after Ulysses S. Grant, who was great for African Americans, great for slaves. This guy just completely wrecked everything. I mean, he went out and pretended like he wanted to make good deals with the African Americans, made it sound like he was going to allow them to vote, completely betrayed them, turned his back on them, did nothing to help them whatsoever, got them on his side. It was an awful, awful president, and I mean, this guy definitely belongs in F tier. President number 20, James Garfield. He became the third president to be assassinated after only 200 days in office. He is going in C tier because the biggest thing he did in those 200 days was revamp the postal service to make it to what it is now, which, I mean, I guess is cool, but if that's the biggest thing you did in office, that's not all that great. He didn't do anything bad, though. Like, 200 days, you can't really screw up too much, or at least, I don't think you can. Next, we have Chester A. Arthur, and he was a decent president. The economy boomed while he was in office, and while he was in poor health and had a very unfortunate temper, he did get stuff done, and he passed some bills and vetoed some laws that he found excessive, and it all helped the economy. And honestly, I think he's a B tier president. Next up, we have Grover Cleveland, and funny how this always seems to happen. He was not good for the economy. I'm gonna put him in D tier, to be honest. He just lowered silver rates, made a lot of tariffs, raised taxes, was not a great president. Not a lot of people liked him. Although, fun fact about him, he was the only president to serve two non-back-to-back terms, just randomly one after losing. So, yeah, that's kind of cool, I guess. D tier president, though. Okay, next up we have Benjamin Harrison. He was an A tier president. He was a very good president. He started multiple national parks. In total, he started 13 million acres of national parks. And he took the U.S. Navy from 20th in the world to 5th in the world in only one term. So I think he was a great president, and for some reason he did not get reelected. He got he did not win his reelection against Grover Cleveland, who, like I said, got that 24th president spot. Next up, we have William McKinley. I'm going to give him a B because he did really help the economy, and he did expand the USA, but he took places like Hawaii, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, which are places I'm not really sure he needed to be messing with. But nonetheless, I do think he was a B tier president. Next up, we have Teddy Roosevelt, and I'm tempted to put him in D, but I will put him in C. Because in his first term, he was a good president. He started multiple national parks, built the Panama Canal, was a very productive president. And then second term, he just turned into whatever he was. I mean, he taxed the rich tremendously and unfairly, shattered trust funds, started Social Security, raised taxes by monumental rates. I mean, bro was trying to ruin the lives of every American. Jeez Louise. But yeah, because of that really flip-flop term kind of thing going on, I'm ranking him C tier. Next up, we have William Howard Taft, and he is a very well-known president, but not necessarily for what he did in office. Pretty much, he's known for getting stuck in a bathtub and being the fattest president ever by quite a few pounds. But in office, he was a decent president. I will give him B tier, because while he did rather few things in office, what he did do was very progressive for the time, progressing forward. Although the things he did do have not carried over well into the current time, so he will probably not be remembered as a great president in probably 20 years from now. But at the time, it was decent stuff, so I will give him a B grade. Next up, we have Woodrow Wilson. Okay, yeah, this is F, easy. This man claimed to be Jesus, started World War I, was awful for the country. I mean, what the heck was this man doing? Like, what was his plans? It was awful. I mean, he very well could be the worst president of all time. I didn't even have to think about this. Next up, we have the 29th president, Warren G. Harding. I will give him D tier. I do not think he was a good president. The biggest thing he did well in office was veto a bill passed that would give bonuses to World War I soldiers. So whenever you hear stories about people not getting paid very much money at all to join the army or be in the army back in the old days, like in those wars, it is this guy's fault because he vetoed that bill. So, yeah, I do not like this guy, but he's not F tier. Definitely not F tier. He's D tier, though. Next up, we have Calvin Coolidge, and he's going in A tier. I do not think there was a president that was as good for the economy as Calvin Coolidge. I mean, he cut the U.S.'s debt cut it by a quarter, 25%. Lowered government spending tremendously. Passed the Immigration Act that allowed less people to come into the country. I mean, he really tightened down on government spending. So I would rank him A tier. Next up, we have Herbert Hoover, and he's gonna go in C tier president because he cut taxes, he helped with the flood crisis, but he also has been blamed to start the Great Depression, which is kind of a big foreshadowing. So I'm gonna put him in C, although a lot of people will put him in D. I think that he couldn't really have started the Great Depression, seeing as he was put into office a year before it started. I don't think that he had enough time to do that. But yeah, C tier president. Next up, we have FDR, and he is going in B tier because he helped us with the Great Depression, but it took him multiple terms to do so, and I think someone else probably could have done it quicker, but nonetheless, he did help us do that, and that is a good thing. He helped us through World War II, but he also imprisoned hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans, and that is not good. That is very bad. So everything he did, there was always one bad thing to kind of go against it, but I do think the good slightly outweighs the bad, so I go with B tier. Next up is Harry S. Truman, and he's actually going to go in A tier. He was a great president. He took action. I mean, the World War II had technically already ended, but he took action after it had ended and made things the way they are now, very, very U.S. favored. And he dropped atomic bombs on Japan, which was basically a revenge for the Pearl Harbor, which I think was a good thing. I think that needed to happen, or the war would probably have started back up a couple years after that. I mean, Japan was still powerful, and that kind of crippled them. And also, I mean, he was just a great dude, too. Like, him and Hoover both, I already ranked Hoover, but him and Hoover both donated some of their salary to charity. Hoover probably a little bit more. But they were good men, and I do think, was a great president. Next up on the list, we have Dwight D. Eisenhower, and he's going in B tier. Because while he was a good president, he started the new highway system that we have today, and he did end the Korean War. He didn't stop communism from spreading throughout Korea, and that was going to come back to hurt us in future events, the Vietnam War. But yeah, I think he could have done more for that, but all in all, he was a good president, so he's going in B tier. Once again, we have another B tier president in John F. Kennedy. While he was a good president, he really was only showed signs of being an A or S tier president during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which he was amazing for that 2-week span. But other than that, I mean, he was just very meh. So B tier president for John F. Kennedy. Next up, we have Lyndon B. Johnson. And for this one, it's solely about, do you care more about the spreading of communism, or do you care more about civil rights? And if you care more about civil rights like me, you are very high on Lyndon B. Johnson, and he's A tier. Because he did, the Vietnam War was just a fiasco, let's be honest. But the Civil Rights Act needed to be passed, and in 1964, his second year in office, it was, and I think that is huge for him, and that is A tier president, in my opinion. Next up, we have Richard Nixon, who, in his time in office, he was a B tier president, but after some sussy business in the Watergate scandal, I'm putting him C tier. Next up, we have Gerald Ford, and he's going into C tier president because he didn't really do anything. I mean, in office, his biggest goal was keeping a truce with the Middle East, which, in my opinion, wasn't the biggest of priorities, but that was all he really did, was make a small truce with the Middle East. So, yeah, C tier. Next up, we have Jimmy Carter, and in my opinion, he is a D tier president. When he was in office, it was a lot like nowadays. Gas prices were at an all-time high for their time, and car manufacturing was at an all-time low, and energy bills were going way up. I mean, he just really wasn't a good president. Next up, we have the guy I was talking about really early in this video, Ronald Reagan, S tier president. In my opinion, the best president in the history of the United States. Not only was he just an awesome guy in general, he also led us through the Cold War. Literally is the reason the Berlin Wall fell. I mean, all of this great stuff, and never did anything bad. He won the biggest landslide election in the history of elections. Like, he got like 412 electoral votes or something. I mean, S tier president for sure. Next up, we have George Bush, and he's going in B tier president because his job was kind of to lull us into some security, like bring our country into security, and he did a pretty good job of that. His goal was not in office to be one of the best presidents of all time. It was just to kind of win the Gulf War, lead to the downfall of the Soviets, like all the stuff that was gonna happen eventually, but he just kind of got it out of the way, brought us to some security and safety, and was a great thing for our country. B tier president. Next up, we have Bill Clinton. Yeah, okay, next. Now it's George H.W. Bush, who led us through 9/11. I think he was a good president during that time, so gets B tier. He was a good president, in my opinion. So, yeah, B tier for George H.W. Bush. Next up, we have Barack Obama, and he was not a good president. Let's be honest here. I mean, the stock market almost crashed while he was in office. I mean, Afghanistan was on a tear. We thought we were doing something good in killing Osama bin Laden, but just kind of made everybody hate us at that point in the Middle East, I mean. So, yeah, I do not think he was good for the country. He also brought us into our current state of debt, which we are still trying to repay. So, yeah, F tier president. Next up, we have Donald Trump, A tier president. He probably would have been B by the time he was out of office, but now that we're about 3 years past his time in office, we're starting to see the side effects of no Trump. Drugs are at an all-time high now without him and his wall. So, yeah. He was a great president, very underrated. Finally, the greatest of... Just kidding. It's Joe Biden, guys. Okay, yeah. F tier. If you like Joe Biden, you're weird. Like, come on now. Don't be an idiot. So, yeah. Joe Biden's F tier. I think everybody can agree that if he's not the worst president, he's second worst president. And it's not really hard to figure out why. Yeah, gas prices all-time high. He has no idea what he's doing. Our military is the weakest it's ever been. We're even farther in debt than we were with Obama. This is just awful. So, yeah, that's my list. Hope you liked it. And, yeah, make sure to like and subscribe. See you guys later.